If you love toys like me, you hang on to certain memories. Like the time you got the turtle blimp for your birthday 5 minutes before you had to go to school and spent the entire day daydreaming about the ways in which your heroes in a half shell were going to destroy the Foot Clan from above. Or opening all your Christmas gifts, waiting to get Egon to complete your set of Ghostbusters, only to never find it until your grandparents surprise you with it as your very last present. In addition to the happy memories, there are many of us that knew our childhood show so well and were fortunate enough to have a lot of the toys that we were often disappointed when there was no action figure for a certain character. Lizard Man from Masters of the Universe is the first to pop in my mind, who only now, thanks to another run of He-Man toys, was finally crafted and made available. Nowadays, things are different. Thanks to changes in technology, passion, and dedication to many brands and styles, the sourcing of diverse materials, and fan communities, you can still find action figures under your Christmas tree from your favorite childhood shows, or you can have that character that was never made before thanks to some super talented people, one of which is my guest today. From Truth and Consequences via Death Valley, en route to Parts Unknown, I welcome Mr. Joe Amato. Hey, Joe.
How you doing, Rob? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, man, this is such a pleasure. You and I don't get to talk enough. I see you post a lot of great images on Facebook, and every time it stops me in my tracks for all the good reasons. Before I even dive into some of the stuff that I get to see that you post online that other people might not know yet, why don't you tell us about yourself and what you do? Because I think it's fantastic. And ever since I met you, man, it's like, I need to work with this guy more. And now we've finally taken one step, and we'll get to that later. But tell us about yourself and what you do.
Okay. Well, my name's Joe Amato, and my full-time job is making custom action figures or sculpting some things completely from scratch. But, because like with a custom action figure, you add onto existing bodies. So I do that. I'll do things from scratch, but it's my full-time job, and I specialize in Masters of the Universe because that's my really big passion. But I'll make absolutely anything, and it's something I've been doing for probably maybe almost 7 years. And what's funny is this was nothing I ever did, growing up. I never went to school to make customs or do anything. I just have always worked kind of basically factory jobs. And when that place kind of went under where I was at for 10 years, I would always look for Masters of the Universe stuff. And one time I seen somebody selling a custom of something. And I was like, I've never done this type of stuff, but I'd love to give it a shot. So the first thing I ever made was a custom imp from Princess of Power. That's Hordak's little, sidekick imp.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so I made him, and it was very crude looking. He was very crude looking, but I put it up on, eBay, and I think it sold for about $70. That was the first thing I ever did. And I was like, you know what? I was like, I think I should really try to take this seriously now. Because after seeing somebody else doing customs and me trying it, I knew, my God, there's hundreds and hundreds of characters from that cartoon and mini comics that were never made in vintage form. So I really took it seriously, and I've just, like I said, everything is self-taught, and I still am improving. I got to keep improving. You never really think you absolutely know everything when you're doing, any job. But I keep trying different little techniques, but I've gotten, better and better, and like I said, it's my full-time job, and I'll do everything from making the figures to making the card backs. That was a giant quest. I think actually making the card backs for the figures was harder than making the figures themselves, because I must have spent 3 months just searching for a particular type of card back, the type of printing, paper to use for them, inks, and cutting them down. I mean, it's, since I'm not doing this, I'm not manufacturing anything. Mm-hmm. It's all out of my house. So having to get a big industrial cutter to cut down all the cardboard to size and, reaming around the punches, the corners and stuff. So, yeah, it's like I said, it's a blast. This is the best job I've ever had because I get to encounter and talk with so many great people and with ideas I could never picture of things when they have me do something for a commission.
So I just want everybody that's listening to take 3 seconds and just realize that Joe makes custom action figures, and that's his full-time job. Just stop and think about that. Okay, is that not maybe the best job ever? I think it. Man, I just love it. And to give some backstory for people that are listening, Joe is working with me and the crew from Power of Grayskull. One of the Kickstarter rewards we had was to forge your own Eternian legacy, in which you could have your likeness or a custom character of your choosing, basically as an action figure. So if you wanted to see yourself in that He-Man universe, Joe would work with you to do that. And just before we started recording, we heard about one of the action figures that's being created from one of our backers, and I gotta tell you, it is so cool. It's very inventive. And Joe doesn't just stop at just the figure and the look. He's also going to help craft a little story for how that character fits into the universe on the back of the card. It's just so awesome, man. Let's start from the basics. What is it about action figures that gets you excited?
It's weird how things can come full circle. I mean, when I was younger, obviously I loved Masters of the Universe. It's what I collected. That was a passion of mine. And of course, when you get older, you quit playing with your figures, and I stored them all away.
Whoa, we're supposed to stop playing with our figures at some time?
Well, what's weird is, when you were a kid back in the 80s, I guess, if you want to say, you get picked on, like, why are you playing with toys still? You should be playing with toys, but nowadays I notice it doesn't matter. People of all ages, from the young to old, they're collecting figures now, and it's like nobody cares. Like, when you have something you really love, it's a passion, and it seems like it doesn't matter, at least nowadays. Like, even for video games, back then you play too many video games, you're a dork, you're a geek, you're a nerd, and now it's like you're weird if you don't play games. It's just bizarre how times have changed, but I can't even explain. I think it was when that new MYP cartoon came out at the beginning of, around the 2000s.
For He-Man.
For He-Man, yes. When that came back on, that started a spark, and I started collecting again. And from there, then it just, I don't know, like I said, after that one place I worked went out of business, it seemed like only natural. It's like, I want to try something. And it's weird that I'm now doing this full time. I mean, Masters brought me into it, but something about, I don't know, just, everybody has things they collect, whether it's, sports memorabilia, footballs and autographs and trading cards to figures and whatever. We have something we love, and I really love watching the passion from action figure collectors. I mean, I've seen so many collections from Marvel, DC, G.I. Joe, Star Wars, whatever you can think of.
Mm-hmm.
And people are proud to display all their collections. But you're right when you say that, this job that I do, I never dreamed it, I never thought it, because I didn't do this kind of creations when I was a kid. It is the best job I've ever had, because I'm loving what I do. Sometimes people might have a job and, hey, I understand you got to pay the bills, but they might really hate their job. But, I love my job. I love it, and it's paying the bills, but it's, like I said, it's just so great, because I've met so many awesome people, including you, just because of what I'm doing now.
Let's go to the flip side of that then. What do you think it is about action figures that gets other people excited? I mean, you're making them now, so I think you've kind of crossed that line. I'm sure you still love them, and we'll talk about some of the new stuff that's come out and get your thoughts on that. But why do other people still get excited about having and owning an action figure and buying it and pulling it off either the peg or seeing it in a store? Like, what is it about this medium, this look, this toy?
I think it's a reminder of our childhood when things were fun and simple and just you could enjoy life, and it's like feeding into your childhood again, possibly. That's how I could see it. They love seeing the things that they grew up with, and if there's a particular cult character they really like, and collecting every one of those certain characters and figures they had, and just, again, displaying them. But I think it has to tie into good memories. There's a lot of bad things that happen in the world, and maybe even as an adult, you might just be unhappy with stuff, but hey, you can always remember when you were a kid and you enjoyed these figures, and they love displaying them and posing them in different, we'll put them in different poses, and I think that's what it has to be, and you'll see some people some people really get into the figures to where they like, when I'm talking about posing, the extra articulation. Some figures might have very limited articulation, and that might actually turn off some of the collectors. They want it to where they could pose their favorite character in any way, just like if they'd see it in a cartoon or a movie, or comics.
Right, yeah.
And like I said, I think that's it. I think it has to be just, it's a piece of your childhood, and you just remembered something fun and you love it, and what's wrong with that?
Yeah, it's a question that I always come back to, and of course, filming Power of Grayskull, it's, we talk about the toys a lot from all the different eras, and, what makes some more memorable than others, and why do they stand out. And I definitely think there's a nostalgic touchstone there. So when you touch it, you feel like you're transported back, 20, 30 years ago. I also think when I look at my action figures and I see them on the shelf, and it's just like, that's a reminder of that universe and that character and all that story that plays out.
Sure.
So as my life goes on and I see these things, it's like, well, what does that story mean to me now? Which is why I always rearrange my collections a little bit. The display always changes, so I get like a different, fresh perspective on it.
Okay.
I don't know. I know a lot of collectors really like to just leave that museum thing out there, but I really like playing with how these displays come across. So yeah, those are all interesting things, that childhood callback.
Sure, because like, for an example, when the Masters of the Universe Classics figures came out, for the first time, I mean, it was fantastic again because, finally new He-Man figures. I mean, they look fantastic. They have a lot of posability, and, of course, I loved them. But what's strange is recently Super7, they've acquired the rights to start doing all the Masters of the Universe stuff, from now 3 3/4 lines, vintage style figures, and of course taking over classics. Well, they had some special exclusive figures at San Diego Comic-Con, and also they then sold them on their website.
Yeah.
And they're based off of that cartoon Curse of the Three Terrors.
Mm-hmm.
And these versions are just glow in the dark. So I'm sure eventually they'll release painted versions, but these special glow-in-the-dark ones, well, I was able to order them off their website, and I just got them, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago. And what's weird, Rob, is I got more excited opening these than the classics. Now, I know the classics are a lot more detailed and a lot more articulation, but I got that, it's what you were just, were saying. I got that childhood feeling. I was like, I felt like I got something from the store when I was a kid. And it was just that it's very simple. Arms move, legs move, waist move, head. That's it. But I don't know about that packaging, that look. It just struck a chord in me that I didn't get with the classics. And I really love that feeling that Super 7 gave me with those Curse of the Three Terror figures.
So for everybody that's probably lost as Joe and I tumble down the He-Man Eternity and nostalgic superfan timeline here, the corridor of time.
Right.
Mattel released a new line called Masters of the Universe Classics, which looked to go back and tackle all of our favorite He-Man figures from the 80s and beyond, with one figure a month initially, and basically go out and conquer. Now, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, that scale is a little bit bigger than the original, and they managed to release all the initial figures plus a bunch more that were never released, yeah?
Pretty much, yes. I mean, they released basically every figure that was ever made back then, not including what were called the Meteorbs. Unfortunately, they weren't re-released, but yeah, they re-released every basic figure that you could think of, and then some, from like the mini comics and cartoons and a lot of other media that they never made back then for Masters of the Universe. So yeah, the classics, it's the biggest line they've ever done so far, quantity-wise, yes.
And now another company called Super7 now has taken over classics from Mattel, and they're still working with Four Horsemen.
Yes.
But they initially released 3 3/4, so think your G.I. Joe, your original Star Wars size thing from the original trilogy on card backs, and they did a set of 4, and now a new recent set of 4, or Wave 2, if you will, of figures are out on those. So there's a lot happening now when it comes to retro packaging and going back at all of these old lines, and they're bringing them back to the public. Yeah, what do you think about those 3 3/4 while we're just talking about it from Super 7?
Yeah, I actually think they're pretty cool, because what's funny is Masters fans never had anything like that, and it always used to be a hypothetical thinking, what would our, property look like in that style? Like you said, Star Wars, G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
And some fans, they were like, like a little iffy about it, but others, they really got into it, and I think most people, or most Masters fans, really did enjoy it. I mean, my God, they even did Masters muscle style figures. You remember the little muscle wrestlers?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, they even did those with Masters. So, I mean, yeah, they've done so, like I said, they're doing so many different things. Super 7 is giving you absolutely everything that any fan of action figures, if you like something, they pretty much seem like they're going to please that group of people. And of course, if you're just a psychotic fan who wants it all like me, sometimes you're just gonna you're gonna get it all because besides Masters of the Universe, the only other thing I really collect was horror figures, and in particular was Jason Voorhees. I mean, it's kind of crazy to say that my childhood heroes, the people I loved the most, was He-Man and Jason. I don't know how that makes sense, but so I collect everything Jason Voorhees you could think of figure-wise.
So for everybody keeping track, in terms of He-Man, there's Masters of the Universe Classics, which are new, which are kind of callbacks and throwbacks to the original figures from the 80s. There's Super 7's 3 3/4 inch line, again, that G.I. Joe look, that Star Wars look. And now, what Joe was talking about, The Curse of the Three Terrors, which is a new cartoon produced by Super 7 that looks more or less like the original Filmation cartoon that came out in the 80s for He-Man. And now they've produced action figures from that cartoon that match with the original line. So it's not a callback. It's not a variation on what a different scale of figures could be. We're talking about something that comes from that era or is supposed to look like that era, tooled the same way, packaged the same way, same bubble, same background, and new figures for the first time.
Right. I mean, they fit in perfectly. They're the 5.5-inch ones. I mean, it sounds like they would like to even continue a lot of, beyond newer stuff. There was a lot of prototypes back then for Masters of the Universe that were never made, like
right.
Hero and Eldor. They were never made in that size, 5.5. So I'm sure, demand being enough, they'll make them. Now, what the only thing different with the Curse of the Three Terror figures is they didn't have like a mini comic or anything like that, like the original 80s He-Man figures had.
Right.
I think that would be a good thing to do because it dazzles up the package. Plus, it's cool to have a unique little story with your figure, but that's the one different thing about their bubble, believe it or not. I mean, I actually mentioned this the other day. Their bubble that covers the figure is slightly different, meaning it doesn't have the raised up part to where a mini comic would go. Right. So they designed the bubble slightly different, but otherwise it's the exact same basic outer design. So
I'm gonna give them a pass on the comic, and here's why.
Okay.
We got a cartoon. We got like a brand new cartoon, and I think that makes up for not getting that comic with that figure, at least on this wave. If they reissue them and their normal paint, and then they want to put a comic with those ones, I mean, not only will collectors go nuts, but I think that's a cool introduction for people that maybe hadn't seen the cartoon, and they'll read it, and then they'll go check out the cartoon after.
And I mean, you're right. I was thinking the exact same thing. The exclusive ones, sure, those would be different. But if they were to make them painted, yeah, if they made a cool little mini comic and just put it in there, I mean, it, like I said, again, gives us flashes of what we remembered when we were kids. Plus, it's cool to have a mini comic, and it's not like they would have to make 4 new stories for those 4 figures, just like they did with some of the other vintage. Just pack the same mini comic with each one. But hey, like again, for min-on card collectors, it looks cool. And for people to open, hey, you got 4 of the same comic, but it'd still be cool.
Yeah, they could always do a variation on the cover for each of them, maybe that focuses on the character it's packaged with, and then keep the content the same.
They could do that. Yeah, exactly.
So,
exactly.
I know we've jumped way down the rabbit hole on this one for everybody that's listening. We've gone deep into Masters of the Universe and He-Man stuff, but I do this for a reason, because I wanted to really illustrate that for Masters of the Universe alone, for people that aren't maybe as heavy into the collecting or toy scene like you and I, there's the original line, there's the classics lines, of course, there's New Adventures, which is still part of that universe. So there's 2002, the Mike Young production, the MYP that you talked about, and there's the classics and the 3 3/4. So that's like 6, and that doesn't even include She-Ra and all the Princess of Power stuff. Right. So I throw that out there, so when someone comes up to you, like we did for the Power of Grayskull Kickstarter campaign, and they say, Joe, I want a custom He-Man action figure, you now have like 6 or 7 lines that you could actually kind of look through.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them out. Like I said, I make absolutely anything they can think of, and even if they wanted a spin on the name or something, like when I make a card back, like if they didn't want it Masters of the Universe, but Horror Master of the Universe, or Horror Characters of this, or whatever it may be, I could do any crazy thing. It's like, I made like one commission for example.
let's talk about some of the crazy things you've done here. I want to, we've held back the aces too long. Let's tell us about some of the awesome pieces you've done. Go. I'm going to go sit back and get my coffee, and I'll come back in 45 minutes, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of them because, like I said, there's a lot of things out of my head. But recently, there was one customer. He's a welder by trade. That's his. I mean, well, that's his job. He's a welder, and he wanted to be turned into like an action figure, but kind of like a monster. And instead of welder, it'd be weldor. But it had to be one of my favorite things I made. I mean, sculpting the head and all the armor and the special, like his arm is half arm, half welding torch. I mean, it just, I never know what anybody's going to ask. And, putting the art on the back, sometimes, like whether they would find art that, they'd want done by a special artist, or even if they drew something up and they thought, hey, I don't think it looks that great. I'm like, you know what? Hey, it's still cool. You drew it up. This is for your figure. I'll put it on the back for the card art. And then I'll add to stuff sometimes because I'm not the best artist coming to drawing, but I could still, do touch-ups and change and twists. And the welding one was pretty cool, but I also, again, these ain't like things like everything I'm doing isn't completely all mine, but like Battle Cat, for example. I was doing a lot of things where I was turning vehicles and beasts into humanoid type figures. So I was like making Battle Cat Man, Bashosaurus Man, and those have to be some of my hot sellers. And then other characters that you maybe want brought into Masters. And trust me, it ain't just Masters, but I mean, I get a lot of orders from Masters to where I was having, G.I. Joe crossover. I'll do crossovers too, bringing G.I. Joe, Thundar the Barbarian, the Amazing Sectars line, if you remember those Sectars lines from the 80s.
Dude, I remember. I mean, I'm working with the guys who just released the Coleco book, and of course, Coleco were the ones that did the Sectors. So, I know the Sectors. Yeah, it was such an underrated and short-lived line, but I do Sectars for Masters, but like I said, I could never imagine what somebody's going to ask because it'll come out of nowhere. Like, just recently I posted up a picture. Like, who would think, for My Little Pony, something I never collected, something I never thought of. This is one of my favorite ones, by the way, that I've seen recently.
Oh, okay, yeah, and that really, I was surprised on it. I'm not to shortchange what I'm doing, but it got so much feedback and shares. I took a My Little Pony and turned him into Beastman and called him My Little Beastie, and because it's what somebody wanted, and people were going bananas for it. I even turned, Jason Voorhees, for example, I turned him into a pony. I turned at least maybe 15 Smurfs into Masters of the Universe characters and Wonder Woman, and we were talking about Sectars. I did Sectar Smurfs, and oh god, like I said, I love this job because I never know what somebody's going to ask me, and then what might come out of my head. Like, for example, again, bringing it to Masters of the Universe, which gave me a great, great feeling, was they had those vintage William George posters that you could get at stores. There was those big rollout ones, that you hang.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, the first one they released, they showed all the characters, and there's names under each character on the poster. Well, there was this Wind Raider flying in the air with this guy in it, and he never had a name. Never had a name. And as a kid, that drove me insane because I kept expecting this blue pilot, whoever was in this Wind Raider, to come out. And I started nicknaming. I called him Sky High. This was when I was like 9 years old, 10 years old. I called him Sky High. Well, fast forward all these years later for Classics, when I started doing customs, one of the first ones I did, right when that line came out, was I made Sky High. I made him. I made a bio for him, a story. I put it on He-Man websites, all on Facebook, and shared it everywhere. And the name kind of caught on. And fast forward maybe 6 years later into the line, possibly, and they released that character, and they called him Sky High. So the name that I called him caught fire in the He-Man community, and they used it for the official character. So that gave me the coolest feeling to know that name I used as a kid, that character finally came out, and he was called that name. It was such an awesome feeling.
I got goosebumps all over right now at this point, because I don't think you can ask for a better kind of dream come true than having a figure named after something that you came up with by the guys that have the license.
Yeah, it was an amazing feeling. So that's got to be a highlight for that. So that's one of my favorite characters just because of that alone. Something I've dreamt of as a kid, and to hear that name now official, yeah, you're right. Of course, it gives me chills too.
So I think everybody that's listened so far could probably read between the lines on what I'm about to ask you, but let's just maybe try to put a pinpoint on this, man. What is it that drives you to continually do this? I mean, there's a lot of long hours in this, I'm sure. It's not always easy, and while there's always a smile and someone happy at the end of the day that, you know, has commissioned you to do this stuff, ultimately, what is it that drives you to keep doing this and keep pushing yourself and keep coming up with new ways of doing it?
What drives me is, well, I mean, beyond the things that I like creating to try to share with people and hopefully they enjoy, it's all the fans of what they're going to ask me. It's like to give them like something like that they've always dreamt of, just like how I mentioned with Sky High, if you will.
Yeah.
A character or something they've always wanted. To give that to them, that's what drives me. It's to see a smile on their face, to hear a story, to see a video. I had, there was a customer in particular. He has a son who's autistic. And this was years ago. And his son really loves tape measure rulers, you know, tape measures. And he collects tons of them. Well, he envisioned himself, and the kid kind of like want to call himself Prince Jaime, like he was a prince in the world of Masters of the Universe. He's like, Joe, could you turn my son into an action figure? He's like, could you do that and maybe even sculpt a little mini tape measure and pack that in with the figure? And I was like, I can do that. So I made it, and he was like, Joe, when I get this, I'm gonna take a video of it, and I want to show you. Because, you know, his son maybe wouldn't smile maybe a whole lot or all the time, or you don't get certain reactions out of him. Well, they gave him the box, and he had this on video and showed him opening the box and then to take the wrapping out to see what was in there. And when he seen that figure of himself, he just started smiling. Oh, my God, that hit me. That hit me to see the reaction I brought out of his son just by seeing himself as a figure. That has to be one of the coolest, if you want to say payments, if you will, or things or treasures for me, was that moment. And I can always remember that now, is seeing that.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I think there's a lot of parallels between what you do and what I do as a filmmaker. I obviously really focus on making movies and documentaries specifically on the things that I love because, you know, if I'm going to be spending tons of hours doing this in years, I want to make sure I love it so I have that passion to get me through all that stuff. Inevitably, when people ask me about, you know, how I'm doing the things that I do and, you know, how you kind of get it out there and stuff like that, they always kind of circle around one question without really asking it, and that's, how do you make a business out of it? So that's a question that I want to kind of throw to you, because it's fine for you to say, you know, you can sculpt this stuff and you can package it, but how do you make a business out of custom action figures?
Oh, when I first started off, I mean, of course, that's kind of tough. You know, you're just coming onto the scene, you're making these figures, and you're hoping somebody's going to bid or buy on them. But after it started catching on, and me, you know, always showing my stuff on Facebook and trying to let people know it, but is first, like, you know, yes, people bid on eBay, but once they bid on eBay, then they usually want to deal with me off of eBay.
So initially, your main distribution platform was you'd make a custom that you think might have some interest, and then you would put it on eBay and see how it does.
Exactly, and see how it does. And then it just was, well, like I said, then it caught on. Beyond them wanting to keep doing business with me, I then just started showing my stuff in more places like, you know, well, Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. It was kind of when it was first coming, you know, around everything. That's when I was trying to show my work. But then it's just, like I said, it's me trying to, share my passion in podcasts. Because, like I said, I do a podcast called Fans of Power. But the thing is, I actually don't promote my work there. I just promote Masters of the Universe. But people see me post a lot because I try to share not just my customs.
Who, you?
Me post a lot. No.
Joe is the number one guy that shows up in my feed almost every time I check my Facebook. I check Facebook per day, whether it's in a group or on his personal page. You have a post somewhere every time I check Facebook.
And I know, because some people have thought I work for Mattel, because sometimes, not sometimes, if you look at my page, you think it's a living Masters of the Universe page, because, I'll share any rare art or weird merchandise or things that I don't think people have seen. I'll share that around, and usually when I share that stuff, then I just get friend requests. People say, oh, you're a He-Man fan? And then we start talking. Then they ask me, maybe what I do, and they see other stuff, and then that'll lead to work. So it's tricky. Especially, like I said, when it's something you never do, but I mean, it's become, like I said, it is my full-time job now, and most of the stuff is focused on Masters, but I mean, I get, like I said, things from Ninja Turtles to horror characters to DC and Marvel. So I do everything, but yes, the main focal point is pretty much Masters. It's what I'm mostly known for.
You mentioned that, if people were to look on Facebook that, they might think that you work for Mattel, and some of the stuff that you do is really high end. It's really impressive, man. We wouldn't have picked you to our superpower team up with our Kickstarter for the Power of Grayskull documentary if we didn't think your work was cool enough or diverse enough to handle the requests of X number of people that are going to approach you about doing the figures that they want. So with such a high work ethic and established stuff that you've done, how do you get around the legal side of capitalizing on the brand of Masters of the Universe, and even around sites like eBay that I know are kind of notorious for making sure that, something is authentic and you're not trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes?
Well, it's a good question, because, I mean, there were sometimes you would go to eBay when people were first making some of those mint-on-card vintage custom He-Man figures, and they weren't saying it's custom. They would show something and people were thinking this stuff was official until people started complaining. Then these people had to start putting custom. But from the get-go, anytime I put something on eBay, I'd always say one-of-a-kind custom. And before doing this stuff, I did look into everything with the companies of, like, what is it I can do to where I won't get in trouble? Now, there's a lot of people that do casting of existing Masters of the Universe parts and things and might put out X amount. And while it's been said Mattel and some companies don't mind as long as you don't go over a particular amount or a certain number, if they wanted, they could actually still legally come after you. So I found out as long as I'm doing one-of-a-kind things, and of course stating it's one-of-a-kind, they don't mind, because I've never said this is an official Mattel product or Hasbro. No, never. I always will put my little label on the thing, whether it's the front or the back or the side. I let people know it's a one-of-a-kind custom, and that's why, in case people ever wonder, why doesn't Joe do any casting and molding like every other customizer? Well, it's because, like I said, legally, I never want to get in trouble. Plus, I like thinking, well, not thinking, I like the thought of that I'm giving each person a special, unique, one-of-a-kind piece. Meaning, like, let's say when I do Battle Cat Man, and I've had a lot of people say, Joe, I really like that. Could you make me one? When I make theirs, everything I sculpted, I'm sculpting again. So I'm not easily just popping in, here's the cast, bam, here's all the parts again. Each piece is special. So you know when you're getting something from me, it's unique to you. So that gives me, again, another cool feeling is you're getting a special piece each time you get something from me.
Now, we talked earlier about how Super7 has acquired the license for the Masters of the Universe line from Mattel, and before, I mean, whether we've stated it specifically on this or not, I know that you've had contact with Mattel, and you've actually been, an integral part to some of the books that Dark Horse has released as well, because you're just that ingrained in everything, which is really cool.
Right.
Do you have to now talk to Super7, and I believe it's Brian Flynn who heads that up, to now that they have the license, say, look, let me know if there's any issues with what I'm doing. This is what Mattel had said. Or is it just kind of status quo?
Well, you'd almost, to some degree, you'd want to assume it's status quo, like with all companies. But yes, to check with him, that is something I would suggest to anybody. Just always be sure, because don't assume that just because one company lets you get away with casting 50 or 100 bodies or heads that everybody's going to let that happen. Because anybody can come after anybody at any time. It's like I said, I always say that to my friends just to look out for them.
Sure, yeah.
I don't want anything, because I never want anything happening to anybody. So that's why Joe just plays safe, and I just do my one-of-a-kind things. That's pretty much, that's it. I will never claim anything as completely from Mattel, from Super7 or something. No, I never mislead people. They all know where something's coming from. But that's for people who sell maybe on eBay too. Don't try to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. Let them know this piece is a custom piece, because things could unfortunately happen.
We hinted at it a little bit earlier too, but again, just for specifics, and this is kind of a two-part thing. The first part is, can you give me like a percentage split on the average figure of how much you're repurposing stuff versus like completely new sculpting?
Okay, well, if it's not just Masters, anybody. Some people love a particular buck, as they call it, a buck body. But I mean, if it's something to where I'm sculpting completely new armor, I mean, There's been plenty of figures I will sculpt all over their legs, all over their arms, their chest, their head. So the outer appearance could look anywhere from 60 to 80% new. I mean, even one could almost look 100% new. For example, was Silverhawks, if you remember that line.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Silverhawks, which was another fantastic line, well, in the vintage line, they never made a character called Yes Man. He worked for Monstar. He was like his crony side, one of the cronies there. Well, they never made him. I took a Bluegrass figure, and everything you see was sculpted over. His entire chest, his lower body, I had to sculpt a whole new a snake body. There's never been a snake body for Silverhawks. So I sculpted that, the head, over his arms, and new hands. So you could say beside maybe one part of his forearm and his bicep, 90% was all new. And I have sculpted things completely from scratch if people wanted it, where, whether it's little mini creatures like Imp or some of the sidekicks or whatever, those were all done from, especially a lot of the Trollins from Masters of the Universe, which is Orko's race. There was at least 8 of those where I didn't reuse an Orko body. I did everything. The body, the head, the arms, and made the posability myself, with the limited posability at the time. So I wanted it just to be moving arms, moving heads, and I used magnets, which a lot of customizers use to make the posability. But yeah, with that case, everything was 100% from me.
So here's the second part of the question, all right? And I throw this at you because, you and I are both not only in the toy kind of things that we see online in social spheres, but also in the video game side of things. And there's a lot of talk in those places about these vintage original video games being like historical artifacts. And I think that way about that stuff. So you'll get a lot of collectors that are up in arms when hackers or homebrew folks repurpose these original vintage materials in order to create something new and put their little seal on it. How do you feel about that, given that there's a little bit about what you're doing here? And what is the general vibe in the toy community about that whole idea?
I would say a very small percentage who maybe don't know what goes into some of the figures. I've seen them actually have an issue with that. I've seen some people say, how can you take, and not just to me, but other, customizers, how can you take those vintage figures and wreck them? I mean, you're now turning something else, but you're destroying it. That was this before and that before. And I tell them, most all the time, these figures that we're using, if I'm using them for bodies, they're not having their armor, their weapons, they're in bad shape where they can't stand. I got to recondition, like you said, repurpose them to where now they can stand again, reband their legs, and clean them up, and then make them new. I mean, otherwise, this would just go in a junk pile, junkyard, get burned. I mean, it would be absolute junk. So it's not like I'm taking complete brand new figures. It's not like I'm taking a vintage min-on-card He-Man figure and saying, bye-bye.
You're not? What?
Yeah, and rip it open. I'm not doing that, So they got to know I'm not taking these vintage pristine pieces and doing that. These are things that, hey, I'm taking the lost figures like in Toy Story that are getting thrown to the side, and I'm giving them life again. And sure, for classics, I've had people send me new figures. These ain't, like you said, the older ones are brand new ones, and they have every right to send whatever they want to me. If they want me to take a brand new classics figure and change it, I'll do it. Heck, they could even for vintage, but I've never seen it. I don't think anybody would ever do that because, like you said, they're historic, they're valuable. So yeah, I'm not wrecking pristine figures. They're just taking stuff that, it needs a little TLC and then some to become brand new.
And I think the other thing too with toys compared to video games in this case, you can walk into like a flea market or even like like a comic book shop that might have action figures and see a Cobra Khan without legs or a Hordak with only one arm. So it's not like you're going to go around looking for that left arm. That becomes a great candidate for some of the custom work that you're doing because it's already in pieces. I mean, heck, I know I've walked into shops before and just seen like a Ziploc bag. They're just full of miscellaneous legs. Right. Some are like Remco legs mixed with He-Man legs, mixed with Turtle legs or Dick Tracy figure legs. They don't know. They're just like, these are like loose kind of cannibalized legs.
No, it's true. And what's even fun is when you'll make something and then somebody asks, okay, for example, I had like a torso, an upper torso of a He-Man body. And I went to a flea market just looking for parts of things, and I got a bag of stuff. I got home and I had things I was like, what would I ever use this for? But hey, I needed this part. Well, this crazy vision came into my mind of a figure. I had an upper He-Man body, and I had a tank, a lower tank of something tread. I have no clue where the figure part came from, but it was a lower tank tread part. Well, I combined that with that figure, and I made a figure called Tankenstein, which is like Frankenstein. So it's like, I called him Tankenstein. And everybody was loving that figure. And they're like, man, where'd you get that tank body? I was like, I have no clue. I was like, it was just a bunch of stuff from a flea market and parts. So, it's like how we were saying, people shouldn't get upset because sometimes you just get parts and do with them what you can.
Yeah, I love it, man. I'm trying to think of tank stuff now, and I think the only thing I can think of is, and I'm gonna lose some credit if I can't come up with this name. I think is it Blaster from Captain Power?
Well, hey, not to only lose cred, I can lose cred because I don't remember watching Captain Power, and I get people always yelling at me, you don't remember Captain Power? I'm like,
you don't know Captain Power? Gary Goddard, live action Masters of the Universe. Ah!
Yep. Yeah, and you're right. I think I remember the cover of that.
Okay.
Or something I think was on it, but yeah, people get on me about not remembering Captain Power or some other things. Like, sorry. But
there's only so much that you can remember, and I mean, my goodness, there's a lot out there. So, I mean, of course, action figures are just one part of this, equation. Do you ever get requests for vehicles or play sets? I know you've said that, and I've seen some variations on Battle Cat and Panther that you've done, of course, which are more like mounts. Maybe you could consider them a mini vehicle, but do you get requests for vehicles and play sets as well?
Well, sometimes, a play set, but it's so advanced, it would take so much that I usually only get too many. The one I got for a vehicle, which was kind of cool, was I altered a Wind Raider, and it was for a guy who, he wanted something special for Christmas. It was the year before. He was like, I want you to make something special for me. I was like, you already made I think it was a Faker Claus for him instead of Santa Claus for him. It was like
nice.
Faker. Well, he wanted him to have a sleigh. So I made the sleigh. I turned the Wind Raider into the Wind Slayer, and I added sleigh rails and did a lot of sculpting onto it. And then for the front, Rudolph was leading it. But it wasn't Rudolph. It was Battle Cat that I turned into Knockoff, the red-nosed reindeer. So, how there's knockoff of toys. So
yeah.
So I made that, and so I altered that. So I can alter vehicles too and try to change them up, just like you said, steeds. But I don't get too many requests for them. But
sure.
But if the need be, I can do it. But something completely from scratch, yeah, that could probably take a bit to make a whole entire vehicle or play set. But alterations can always be done quickly, when they need those too.
What are some of the toughest pieces that you've had to create, and what made that so tough?
Sometimes it's, like I said, sometimes it's little mini things. It's just because when I'm doing something completely from scratch, you gotta worry about sometimes, especially if people are wanting them in packages, to find a special packaging, because I go to the store and people think I'm there trying to steal stuff, and the reason is I will go up and down aisles looking at anything packaged just to see, would this fit an action figure? Can I then re-clean it? Because I re-clean all the bubbles to reuse them. But I'm looking in aisles for light bulbs, sometimes for a weird mini figure or something that holds a light socket, or you can't even picture it. But I think the toughest thing is to search for the packaging for the strange, weird, unique sculpting things I do for people. It's my search for those, because it's like, it's like not super tough, I guess, comparing a large to a small as for sculpting wise. It's just my thing behind a packaging. So if the packaging's not involved, I pretty much put them all on the same level, from a giant figure to a small figure. They all pretty much, they all have a certain technique you do. Uh-huh. But obviously with the small ones, I got to sculpt super small, which is tricky. Like, the smallest figure I ever sculpted was just under the size of a nickel. And that was a mouse called, it was, I think, Davy Jones, or whatever he was from, again, Princess of Power. It was Seahawk's little sidekick mouse.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, if I make him, I'm not just gonna make a big mouse to go with him. I was like, I'm gonna go all out. And I sculpted that thing smaller than a nickel, and I actually put little mini whiskers. I took like little. Actually, it was from the paintbrush. I took paintbrush hairs or whatever, and I popped them out, and I cut them down super small, and then put them into the sculpting material and gave them little whiskers.
I think there was a Kickstarter not long ago for the Well of Souls. Like a 3D printed thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And one of the stretch goals for that, and this is why I brought up Playsets earlier, or one of the rewards that you could back if you wanted, was to have a Crystal Castle playset that this person would 3D print, or something of the Classics line scales. And I think he even mentioned like that they would do Eternia in the Classic scales. The question I got for you is, how much do you find 3D printing and the immersion of that technology impacting what you do?
Well, what's interesting, it doesn't impact it at all, because everything I'm doing, it's usually when somebody wants one special thing, one kind things. And
sure.
So the 3D printing, it's really cool because, sure, I mean, they can mass produce a lot of things for people and just give them out in tool quantities. But sometimes, like even a special request, you wonder what would that cost a person a special request on 3D printing to make this and that, and the posability and packaging or whatever. It can almost come to the same price of what I'm doing. So at least, yeah, I mean, the 3D printing it's cool for, like, again, mass producing for people, but mine's just one of a kind stuff. And the 3D printing, I don't know, like, okay, I don't know for like playsets for Eternia. While that sounds great, you gotta remember Eternia had, the tracks, it had movable parts, it had battery operated stuff to go around the track. Can all this stuff be done? And if it can be done, how expensive can this, is that going to be?
Sure.
And all the different materials, like to paint each piece, is it going to be all printed in a certain color? Will they have to do painting? That could become quite long and painstaking too. So price-wise, things could be pretty similar. It's fantastic what 3D printing can do. It's amazing, but it hasn't impacted me at all for doing what I do for personal stuff for people.
Yeah.
But it's really cool. Yeah, but it is great for people who want to, if they want to mass produce, it's awesome. It's really
I'm not even, I guess I couldn't completely understand why you go right to the mass production and stuff, because once you've got the schematic in there and the 3D blueprint, it's just you hit a button and it builds it.
Sure.
But I'm even thinking if there's stuff that you can do that is so intricate, even if it's just a one of a kind 3D print for, whether it's your version of the Cosmic Key from the live action movie or a different hybrid of a sword or something like that, that would just be a lot easier to get the precision versus sculpting by hand, even if it's just a one-off.
Yeah.
If there is an advantage to using that kind of technology.
I could say possibly, like, when you have things symmetrical for maybe certain really big things, it's good to have that printed, but sometimes there's just the things that the human eye can, and I still say human eye and hand can do and catch, that sometimes you can't get with the 3D printing. I don't know if it's just, like I said, you feel like, hey, you're at least getting something done by a person's hand, one of a kind, when you're at least sculpting these little pieces of parts or bits. It's like, okay, for a face, for example, or certain parts, I almost don't want some things, especially with creatures, being completely symmetrical. Because, look at the human face and the body. If you look in the mirror, not everything is perfect on the left and the right. It's called having a little character and something special. And I like knowing that I can do that. But I know that, yes, 3D printing is so fantastic. It should be able to pick up any fine detail. It should. But like I said, I guess, I don't know. I just, maybe it's because, again, I don't do the casting and printing, and I legally always want to avoid that stuff. But I know that the 3D printers are fantastic, and they can do amazing things. So I guess between people and the printers, they're both good. It's just, like I said, it actually hasn't impacted me at all, because, what I'm doing special for each person. Plus, if they want, the packaging, card backs, and all that. But, no, I have all the respect for people in the world that do those, the 3D printed stuff.
When I jump in to make a documentary or any kind of film or filmed project, I always want, like, a reasonable budget. It doesn't have to be a good budget, but a reasonable budget, a quality crew of people to work with, and a lot of organization. Those are the things that make my life easier for me to go into something. What is the perfect scenario for you when you take on a new commission?
from from a person in general, I guess.
Yeah,
well,
so like if somebody was going to approach you after they hear this fantastic interview, what kind of things would you tell them that they should bring to the table or have figured out before contacting you?
Okay. Oh, I mean, if they're to contact me, just obviously ahead of time, at least have an idea of a body style you want, a bio background if they're going to want a bio made for a certain character, if there's certain kind of art, if, you do want a card back. But the amount of options, like, do you want detachable arms? I want to know basically the exact description you can give, even if you can't draw, because some people will give me drawings of an idea of what they want, and I work right from that. So that usually works perfect. But if they don't have a drawing, just at least be as descriptive as you can, and then I'll try to bring that to life. And I guess that's what I need. I just need either a drawing or the best description possible, and then I work with them from there.
So essentially, the more that they can bring to the table, even if it's stuff that doesn't make sense, the easier it is for you to kind of realize their vision.
Yeah, exactly. Because I wouldn't want them thinking, I couldn't imagine this not being done, because sometimes, you start spitballing the ideas with them, and you come up with something even, better than what they could think, or I could think. It's like working together, we start creating something even better. I love working with people with whatever they're telling me, because sometimes we can create even stuff, like I said, that they weren't expecting. So it all balances out. But yeah, as long as there's some kind of description and idea, I can do it. And if they have like I said, want for like classics or anything, a story or a bio card for like G.I. Joe, have somewhat of an idea. If not, I'll try to shoot something. And if they don't like it, we'll go back and forth until eventually we have exactly what they want. Because I'm easy to work with. I'll work right with them. If they don't like something I wrote, they can correct this, fix that, and boom, I'll get it done. But because I've done plenty of G.I. Joe character, bio cards on the backs for people for those two, and Star Wars. Like I said, I do almost anything they want, any style card from modern to vintage, whatever you'd want to, if you're a mint-on card collector.
How do you feel about people who want their likeness made into figures? Like, how does that work? Is that like a tougher thing because now there's a little bit of ego?
Okay, well, no. Well, not just that, I don't ever think of ego. I love when they want, like, because sometimes when people say, I want to be turned into a figure, but they get the cartoon comic twist, if you will, to where, they kind of look like themselves, but they know they're cartoonish now, or a demon, which is cool, but some people might want exact likeness, and I always tell them, hey, and even with the 3D technology, you see a lot of companies that, like when they're doing the wrestlers, some would look close, but even those never look exact. And I always let them know, I was like, well, me sculpting from scratch, you'll look close to you. It might not be exact, but heck, even the 3D printed stuff that we were talking about, seems like for some reason when they were using that technology to make these wrestler heads, even those weren't spot on. So I always at least let them know, hey, it'll be close. You're not going to be an exact replica of your face in toy form, but you could tell basically it's you into a toy form, if you will.
We talked at the top of this whole awesome fan discussion about how the big companies, especially Mattel, how they're breathing new life into some of their properties from the 80s, and Hasbro's no different. We've seen new releases of He-Man stuff, G.I. Joe, and Thundercats. Transformers has never really stopped, I don't think, but we still get G1 reissues. TMNT has a huge wave of reissues happening right now, it feels like, with the Eastman and Laird Villains pack, the TMNT game pack, like the video game version figures coming out. What are your thoughts on that, I guess, as a fan of seeing these reissues and them going back to the well of what made these lines so popular? And also as a guy who's really making a living providing content from this space.
Well, I'm all for nostalgia and beyond. I love seeing that. I love to see when they can bring stuff of things that what we remembered, and of course doing stuff now, even though, again, like I said, I see some people say they just don't. I don't know why, but I've actually seen some people say they got so used to articulation of all modern stuff, they don't like almost any of the type of toys from any property of how it was vintage wise, because of just, well, whether the detail isn't there or the articulation isn't there, and more power to them. But I love seeing all the companies do all that stuff. I love seeing the stuff from every type of, like you said, from vintage to modern. And I would love to see that again someday, at least when you're talking about things at the stores too, because there's such a big online community. But He-Man will never appear back in, or Masters of the Universe, the toy aisles until there's ever a movie or a cartoon, because they have nothing to back them. But, I mean, I like it. I mean, when you're asking about those type of styles and all the different things they're making, I enjoy them. It's just sad seeing some properties not, I guess, get the rebirths as I think they should. Like, I mean, well, especially with He-Man not being back at stores, but I would love to see other things get kind of a revitalization, like how we talked about Sectars earlier. That would be cool. One that never had any action figures, so underrated, would be so cool, was, do you remember the 80s Dungeons and Dragons cartoon?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Love that cartoon, and it's so sad they never had action figures. I mean, they had the figures based off of, yes, the D&D, board games and all that stuff, the games, but not the cartoon. But that's such
we can cross our fingers, because that film is being fast-tracked. The new D&D film is being fast-tracked. And you know how these studios like to work, right? They'll release the new film, then they'll probably re-release the old cartoons and stuff on Blu-ray. And if that's there, we're only a little tether to maybe getting action figures, even if it's just for the collecting market, for those cartoon figures. Hopefully.
It would be nice. Now, the movie you speak of, is it based off of the 80s cartoon, or is it based off of just the lore of Dungeons & Dragons? I didn't know about that.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I just know that it is fast-tracking like crazy. I don't know if the results of Warcraft, because that is a little bit of sword and sorcery as well, have impacted what the budget on that's going to be, but I know it is a top priority that film gets out there. And I mean, hey, so much of the concept work is already done for D&D, thanks to all the years and decades of TSR doing, the artwork for that stuff. So they've got a lot to draw upon.
That would be good. It would be nice to see, especially for a first time to see figures from that cartoon. That would be pretty cool. So hopefully it would happen.
Right now, you're kind of a solo guy and doing your own thing, cottage industry, like one piece at a time, which is really awesome. You get to kind of say what your hours are, and they probably go something like 6 a.m. to midnight every day. But do you have any desire to ever work for a company that has the official licenses to these properties that you love?
I mean, if ever asked, it would be a dream. It would be fantastic. I'd love to work for an official company. Have I ever went and asked anybody, hey, you hiring? No, I honestly have not. I don't know if, hypothetically, if I ever did start working for a company, I don't know, like, I guess legal stuff, like would they still allow me to do custom figures for people even while working for them? I don't know how that would work, because I love doing what I do for people, and I don't know if that would be taken away. But I mean, sure, if it was, if I was ever asked, I would love to work, and especially giving ideas, because beyond making, like I said, the figures, I have stories and things, and out of my head, I'm always thinking of something different, as you see online all the time.
Yeah.
It's beyond just figures. I really do have a knack sometimes for knowing certain things that could be kind of cool to see in toy form. So if ever asked, yes, I'd jump all over it. But if it never happens, hey, like I said, I love doing what I'm doing now. I love just making people happy, because it makes me happy too.
I'm still thinking about your My Little Pony custom at this point. I know we're a half hour after we talked about that, but I'm so surprised Mattel, because you also posted your picture of your Swiftwind done as My Little Pony, My Little Swiftie.
Yeah.
And that just makes me think, why wouldn't Mattel do their own version of My Little Pony with Swiftwind and all the horses from Princess of Power, and almost spin it like Disney did with Tinkerbell?
Right.
Tinkerbell has like her whole own universe now with all the fairies and stuff like that. With the popularity of horses and how that has always been a staple, why wouldn't Mattel spin Swiftwind off as the main character to all the horses or other animals of Princess of Power? I think that would be really cool, and an easy sidestep without having to worry about the fans too much.
Yeah, the little gimmicks that you could do that just people could eat into, it really is endless. It's like, like making little mini figures, or those super deformed figures, or whatever they call them. From any property, people just like strange little things, little collectible things that you could take to work, put in your car. Because you're seeing action figures everywhere now when people are taking them to somewhere. But there's so many spins, like the zombie craze, for example. Even doing a crazy, goofy zombie line of anything, from Ninja Turtles to He-Man, G.I. Joe. Trust me, that would sell too. People like when you mix two things together. It's like, peanut butter and chocolate, but you put that together, that's it, So
It just works.
Yeah, it works. So yeah, when you do the spins of two things together, it's like, how can you go wrong? I mean, I used to even think it was cool. Of course, I never had happened, but I always thought, man, how cool would it be seeing like Skeletor, He-Man, and the rest of them having a crossover with type of like Transformers, even though of course they're two separate companies, but that would be cool. Like maybe you see a power sword and you transform it, bam, it turns into He-Man. A Havoc staff goes into Skeletor. I mean, just crazy stuff.
Well, I mean, we got the Meteorbs were like, that in that direction where we were starting to get transformable action figures. I don't even know if we were that far away from what you're suggesting.
And that could have been cool. And yeah, because those are the unfortunate figures that, like I said, weren't made for classics and brought back. And see, what I've come to see is people who grew up with Masters of the Universe back then, when they collected stuff, they collected everything. I mean, everything, because you use your imagination as a kid. So you got these Meteorbs. If they didn't have a story, you made a story for them. You never questioned them and thought, this does not belong with He-Man. You never said that. Yeah, we got elephant head people. I mean, we got, merman people. I mean, you know what I mean? Everything is fantasy. It's a world of fantasy. But if you were somebody who started collecting He-Man after the toys were off the shelves and the cartoons off the air, and you're getting hand-me-downs, and you have everything that looks alike, and then suddenly you get these Meteorbs, you're like, what the heck are these? This don't belong. And that's usually when you find the people that didn't like the Meteorbs or didn't like Stone Dar and Rock On, because they kind of look like figures, but you bend them over and they look like rocks. And there was two other figures. One was called Rotar and one was called Twistoid. They're called the Energy Zoids from Masters of the Universe. Well, they were spin figures. Like you spin them and they would like spin on their tops or whatever. They're like top spinning figures.
Yeah.
Very, very cool, but they didn't look like they belonged. So if you were somebody that collected it after its craze, those were the ones that unfortunately people didn't like.
You see, that's weird to me because for me, and I probably got into it like as it was coming up and then after the fact as well. So when I was playing with them, those things, and so I had the Meteorbs and I had Stone Dar and Rock On, and for me, they were like the neutral party on my like Eternia planet.
Yeah.
So they didn't know who to go for, and very much like the role of Castle Grayskull, everybody kind of wanted to get them. So the eggs, I always pretended that they didn't transform for a while until whoever got to them, and then that like unleashed another power. So because they were different, they made the stories better.
And that's pretty cool. And the thing is, they actually did. What's weird is a lot of these figures that we got that maybe had one episode in a cartoon, one crumb of an appearance with nothing special in a mini comic or even on a poster, like I always said with Sky High, which is very awesome. The Meteorbs did have a big story, though. I mean, they had their own comic book dedicated to them when the Star Marvel was doing Masters of the Universe comics back in the 80s. Issue 2 was dedicated to the whole entire origin of the Meteorbs. The Meteorbs even had a story on their back of their card backs. They had an amazing poster, and plus Comet Cat and Dinosaur appeared in an episode of Princess of Power. So they had some coverage, very good coverage. And I guess it's some people who, like I said, think that they wouldn't fit in. Well, picture this. They would get an upgrade. If the Horsemen did them, I'm sure they're not going to be the small, mini little eggs that were used back then. They would probably get an upgrade with a slight bulbous egg shape, but the Horsemen can make anything. The 4 Horsemen who do these figures could make anything look fantastic. And it's like I said, it's just unfortunate because some people thought, oh, well, it's legal rights that they wouldn't be able to do them because Bandai is the one who did the... Oh, remember, they weren't Meteorbs to begin with. It was Tamagoras that they borrowed this mold and this line to use them. But all the names, for what they called the Meteorbs and the Meteorbs themselves, that's all Mattel. But of course they're not going to use those molds again, so they can do whatever they want if they remake them. So
I think the big takeaway from all this stuff, again, another fan tangent between you and I on air for everybody's pleasure, is that this is exactly what you do with your custom stuff. Anybody can approach you to get a custom figure, and it's the fun of fitting them into that universe, whether it's Jason Voorhees in Eternian garb, or whether it's Plumor or Weldor or whatever it is, right? Like, there's a way to let it fit in there. So I would urge people to, really put their creative caps on and think about, what figure they would like in the series that they love, and to get a hold of you, which, of course, let's get that information out there, Joe. Where can people check out your work, and what's the easiest way for them to contact you?
Well, I guess the easiest way, they can go to Facebook and just type in Joe Amato Custom Creations, and that's my custom page. You'll see most, not all, but most of my work there. And from there, then, you can send me a message. We can work from there. Then, of course, just my regular Facebook page is Joe Amato, and there might be other ones, but trust me, you're only going to see one that's going to be always showing action figures. That's obviously, you'll know me. Trust me, you're gonna know me by action figures. I don't show a profile picture, so you don't have to worry about ever seeing a human face. You're just going to see action figures as my profile picture. You'll know it's me.
Well, and we'll make sure that that information is the show notes as well, for people to make it an easy click to get right to you. Man, listen, I want to thank you for your time coming down here and indulging my custom action figure fantasies. I'm so glad that you're part of Power of Grayskull, making these custom figs for everybody. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. It's been a blast.
So that's another episode of In the Trenches. Make sure you guys check out the other people that we've been interviewing, of course, in the trenches, taking a look at the gritty side of creativity. I'm your host, Rob McCallum. Until next time.